Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 135th episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this episode, I'll be talking about language, imagination, and reality. And this is, again, one of those episodes that I had as listening to the channel of Theories of Everything with Kurt Jaimungal and his interview with Terence Deacon. They talk a lot about language and ideas and all these kinds of things, about index, about languages being an indexation of the world and all that stuff. And to me, all of this is a little bit too complex. And I'd like to sort of simplify what language is, what purposes it serves, and putting it into context of why it's there for humans. So if you listen to my previous videos, you will know that in my view, there are different dimensions. And there's always a bridge between different dimensions. Between the world of physics and chemistry, you find as a bridge the star, within which all the chemical elements are forged. Here you just have like basic atoms. And now here you can have all those more complex elements that bond together to form complex molecules. And this is where planets are, basically, which are big balls of unconscious chemistry. And then the living cell, or life, is the bridge between chemistry and biology. Basically, within a cell is just a kind of harmonious way of arranging chemical reactions, or organizing chemical reactions, which lead to a certain number of properties. Like, for instance, the fact that this can replicate itself. It has an energy input-output system. I mean, it's just like life can be defined by many different ways, many different characteristics. Now, obviously, this is a very simplified version of my view of life, but I'm using this model just for the purpose of understanding what language is. I would have to go into much deeper considerations. Like in other videos, I talk about life as actually being the first thing that appears between 0 and infinity, and life not taking the form of a living cell originally, but as the experience of a universe that is alive sort of matures, then that's the form that it takes eventually. But okay. Then in biology, you have like plants, animals, all kinds of different things. And then you have the human, which is the bridge between biology and ideas, thoughts, concepts. And we can see that basically as these different elements appear, you could view this as just pure energy. And each layer just superimposes on this energy. It's almost as if it's a structure that gives this energy a certain form. And if you look at humans as the bridge between ideas and thoughts, concepts, which are basically in a dimension of their own, a non-material dimension, they can come into our reality via humans. So, for instance, democracy is not something that you can touch. It is a concept that resides in a human's mind, in his mind's eye or imagination. But with a coordinated effort by a human society, democracy can take physical form, like, for instance, the government buildings, with texts of law. I mean, all kinds of different tangible things, like borders, like procedures, like all kinds of rituals that happen in the physical reality and that are governed by this idea, something that is abstract, that is immaterial. And so language, in this sense, is just an instrument Well, for two things mainly. First of all, it's an instrument for synchronizing imaginations. And second of all, it's an instrument for manipulating and giving a form to one's own imagination. So if you go back to Terence McKenna's theory, which I really like, that humans, the human brain is what it is because of this stoned ape theory. Now, a stoned ape, humans are therefore a kind of animal that hallucinates 100% of the time. We are constantly under the influence. That is a bunch of apes that stone themselves permanently all the time by consuming a hallucinogen like a mushroom or something, may have permanently altered their brain chemistry to reside in a world that is fake or virtual or abstract. So they may have, while their bodies were grounded in physicality, so their bodies were stuck in the physical reality, their minds were in another realm, which is this new dimension of concepts, ideas, thoughts, an abstract kind of non-material world. And the whole idea was to bridge these two, the gap between what they hallucinate and reality. And so it's very easy to understand in this way. You can see 3 or 4-year-old children that take a piece of wood and pretend like it's a car or like it's a doll. Other animals can't do that. No other animal can take something like a stone or whatever and use it or pretend like it's something else. Like you would see children talking to the stone as if it were a person. You know, like in the film with Tom Hanks when he's what is it? I can't remember the name of the movie. But where he's alone on this island and he starts talking to a volleyball, basically, saying that I'm calling it Wilson, and then having a whole kind of engagement and interactions with it. That is not something you see commonly in animals, and if you do, typically it's also because it's animals that have been close to humans and have sort of, how should I say, being under the influence of humans and their hallucinations, they're starting to develop also a kind of mind of their own. And that's typically typical of dogs or other animals that come into contact with humans. It's sort of our mental processes kind of permeate into them. But if you leave them in the wild, they will lose those kinds of behaviors. So yeah, language. That's where language sort of comes in. Language is just a tool for helping to make sense of one's own hallucinations, basically. It's for synchronizing hallucinations. So if you and your friend, imagine you're 10 friends. You each take a mushroom and you each start hallucinating reality and interacting with reality in very, very weird ways. Now, animals don't need language because they are synchronized in their way of viewing the world. They view it essentially through this biological lens. They do not have access to the immaterial dimension of ideas, concepts, and thoughts. They don't have access to hallucinations, basically. They can only see reality the way that it is, from a very deeply ingrained biological kind of wisdom. So they see reality through the prism of danger or safety, through the prism of something is edible or not edible. Something is hot or cold, and all these kinds of things, danger and safety. So then they can be content with very primitive forms of language, which are used solely to translate these kinds of inner kind of knowings into sounds. So translating the idea of danger or of safety or of comestible food in a way that is, in a non-physical biological way, like for instance with a sound. But humans have to grapple with a realm that is immaterial, that is completely new, and that is completely hallucinated. And they need to start synchronizing their hallucinations, otherwise there's no more communication possible. So what's the reason why language emerged in the first place was for that reason, to synchronize hallucinations that were completely desynchronized in the beginning. Just like when 10 people take LSD, if we didn't have language to communicate what we're seeing to the other person, what we're experiencing, the other person could not relate. It could not help us deal with it or do something about it. And if you look at what language is used for, mostly, it is to communicate what you have in your mind's eye, what you're hallucinating as a person, to somebody else. And if enough people hallucinate the same thing, they manage to make that bridge between the immaterial and the material dimension. For instance, if one person hallucinates about Christ, God, angels, and all that stuff, well, there's not much tangible, there's not much way that he can affect reality. He'll basically be considered by society as being somebody that's crazy, that's in his own kind of hallucination, personal imagination. And maybe he'll start uttering in, what they call, tongues, or which is this kind of babbling that sounds nonsensical, like you're speaking in this weird language that is just instinctive or whatever. You're in your own personal imagination that is not the same as somebody else. But when millions of people are manage to synchronize their hallucinations, then it does take tangible form, in the form of churches, for instance, building churches, organizing a social structure around it, like having priests and a clergy, having a book of reference like the Bible, certain rituals, all kinds of things. And you can view everything through that lens. You can view even our scientific way of viewing the world as a collective hallucination. And the more people, just as these collective hallucinations have varying degrees of power, depending on, factors that are completely outside our control, which is basically, it's like the growth of a baby in its mother's womb. There are certain stages to its development. Or, for instance, if you try to teach a kid how to do calculus when they're 3, it just won't work. So there's certain ways of viewing the world, or certain hallucinations that have more power over reality. The reality we experience seems to be because the time is ripe for that kind of hallucination to take hold at a certain stage of development of humanity as a whole. But let's go back to this idea of language, which is really, really, really crucial. So language emerged as an instrument to synchronize different hallucinations of these different stoned apes, basically, that had to synchronize and agree on a collective hallucination so as to have a collective experience also. Otherwise, they would each go their separate ways and be completely disconnected one from the other. And then once you synchronize your imagination via these words that you invent to name your hallucinations, to give a form. It's really important to give a form to your hallucinations, or to create a symbolic sort of word for your hallucination. Then you can also manipulate that form in your own imagination. You're giving a form to your own imagination, and now you can manipulate it in your own mind and then communicate it to others so they can manipulate their own minds as well to synchronize their imagination with yours. So I'll give you an example. Imagine if these stoned apes, so you imagine 10 humans that are completely stoned, right? They don't have any, they're hallucinating things like creatures that don't exist in their minds. And they have no word for them. And they see them, but they cannot agree on what they're seeing, the 10 of them. And then one of them says, oh, well, wait a minute. That thing that I'm seeing in my mind, that hallucination, it actually resembles this other animal that I've seen. And I'll name it, let's say I'll name it a horse. Fine. Okay. So now this one person says, I'm seeing a horse. And then another person says, no. Actually, what I'm seeing is more like an eagle. And it creates the word eagle so that it can put an index, not on something that you see on the outside. You don't really need that for the outside, because don't forget, biology only interacts with things as danger or safety. You don't need to distinguish the eagle from the owl, from whatever. You just see danger or not danger, safe or not safe. You don't care. The only reason you would start doing that is because you need to sort out and synchronize your own imagination, and you're using the outside world perception. You're starting to categorize the outside world because you need to categorize your inner world, your inner mind that is a complete mess. And so some person says it's an eagle, and then another person says, no, it's a rhino. Actually, I'm seeing a rhino. And then gradually they're synchronizing their imagination. They're saying, well, no, it resembles a horse, but it also has wings and it has a horn. Okay, and then they come up with a totally new term, which is unicorn, to name something that doesn't exist and to sort of synchronize their imaginations around a non-existing idea, concept, or thought, using the outer world as they perceive it as a sort of baseline kind of reality for making sense of their hallucinations. And then there's a back and forth kind of mechanism that goes from imagination to reality, from reality to imagination, where all of this kind of cross-fertilizes itself. And that's how you get into genetic manipulations. In the future, maybe we'll create unicorns, using, I don't know what kind of weird genetic processes. But not only that, it's also this idea of giving material form to ideas and thoughts that you've managed to synchronize amongst enough humans. So the idea of a car, for instance, once enough people have internalized what it is, what the car is as a concept, once their imagination is synchronized around what it is, then as a collective, we can sort of materialize that idea and give it a material form and bring it into our reality and bridge the gap between the dimension of abstract, immaterial things and the material reality. And so these words that you use, the language that we use, is not just a tool for synchronizing our collective imaginations, but also for manipulating your own imagination, which then in turn you can communicate to other people. So you, by communicating, by giving children the ability to speak, they can then start to manipulate their own imagination. And you can see it in the development of a child. Basically, language is also a way to gain control over many different things, like your feelings, your emotions, and trigger emotions in turn, where animals would not be capable of that. Animals would just express whatever emotion it is that they want to express as soon as it appears. But humans, through language, gain this reflexive kind of tool whereby via language, they can reprogram certain biological processes, certain things within them. So the mind takes control over the body to a certain degree. That's also the placebo effect, the concept of belief. And in order to have a belief, you need to have words and language to express that belief, to give a form to that belief, and to access that belief as imagination, to carve out a part of the imagination which then superimposes itself on top of, well, your body, basically. So the placebo effect is basically a belief that something will heal you, and that belief then superimposes itself on a biological reality and gives it a tangible form via the belief. But in order to access that belief, in order to have a belief, you first have to structure and give a form to the hallucination, because if it's not structured, the hallucination, it has no hold on you. It doesn't have any influence on you. You have to first sort it out. It's like basically a disassembled car will not take you anywhere. Only if you assemble it in the proper way will it drive you and take you somewhere. And you could say the same thing with words, with language, with all of that. If these hallucinations or the beliefs are not structured properly, or the thoughts and ideas, then they lose their potency or their weight, their importance. Hence why it's so important to achieve a good understanding and use and knowledge of language, because the more you master language, the more you can not only express things to others and allow them to synchronize their minds faster, their imagination faster, but you can also mold your own imagination and control your own imagination much faster as well. And this just goes into so many other things, like for instance, neuro language programming or NPL, NLP. I don't even know what the term is, but using language to reprogram your belief systems and change your life via language. It's as if, as humans, we hallucinate of being capable of doing things that normally we would not be able to do if we look at purely our biology. There's nothing in our biology, for instance, that predisposes us to be a concert pianist or a football player. These are all hallucinations, roles that we've created that have no biological grounding whatsoever, but we manage to hallucinate into them, almost as if we would mold our bodies and transform our bodies to fit into the mold of the hallucination of whatever collective hallucination it is to be a football player, what the football player is supposed to do. And you have to imagine it. And the people that are the best at imagining what it is to be a good football player are the best at it. And it's the constant process of this active mechanism between doing it in the physicality and then pushing your imagination further and your hallucination further of what could be done, and then bringing it again into reality, into physicality through the body, and this process repeating and repeating and repeating, and over millions of years, then you get people that accomplish amazing things and seem completely disconnected from biology, which they are in a way. But it's just this hallucination that, just like we shape this piece of wood that we play with and pretend like it's a doll, and we carve the doll out of the wood with a knife, so too language is this tool where you just carve out of reality your hallucination. You use it as a tool to synchronize your imagination, to structure your hallucination and bringing it into physical form. Now, I'm using language right now to talk to you and to convey this idea. And I realize that I'm not the best at finding my words. Sometimes I do stumble on words. So I'm not yet perfectly skilled in mastering language and using it as a scalpel where I can really just sum up my idea with this one core sentence. I go all over the place. It sometimes takes very long to carve out all that I want to say. And sometimes I repeat myself. It's slow. And eventually I become better and better at this, and then I can encapsulate it in maybe a sentence, which is sometimes so loaded with meaning that it takes like 10 or 20 or 30 minutes of just thinking about it, just that one sentence, because it carries so much, content in it. So yeah, I mean, language is that, and so that's why humans have language and animals don't have language, because we're obviously we have these hallucinations, animals don't. And once you view language as that, you understand why languages are similar, but also different depending on the culture, because, well, different collectives hallucinate different things, and so they agree on different things. And they need different words to agree on different hallucinations. And that's what's really fascinating, for instance, when you look at tribes like, the San in Botswana, if they don't have a word for evil or for stealing in their societies, you witness that those kinds of behaviors don't really exist. And so that's what's really interesting, is that ultimately, for instance, imagine like a group of apes or whatever that were stoned, observed a certain behavior, and then cataloged it with a certain word, coined it with a certain word, then it became part of their reality that superimposed itself, or like almost like an idea that superimposed itself on top of a reality where that idea didn't have any tangible hold, and where, one act of violence would not be related to another act of violence. It would just be a biological one-off kind of behavior, and then it would sort of disappear if there was no more biological need for it. But then if you sort of now cement it with using the term evil or the term theft, then now, as a human collective, that idea superimposes itself on society, and you will start seeing it appear over and over again, because we carve it out of reality, just like, that doll that you carve out of wood, and now it's there. And so that's also why words have such an importance, and this idea of non-duality is so seductive to today. It's this realization, basically, of this mechanism, that the words that you use, the concepts that you juggle with, and having mastery over your concepts and the language is a way to really make sure that the ideas, thoughts, and concepts that you bring into material reality are the ones you want to see there, and not just being this passive kind of this almost like a plastic that has holes in it and is not in control over what seeps through from the immaterial into the material, because we never sort of consciously recognized our role in doing that. And we just say, well, it's not my fault that there's evil out there. Evil is just out there. Well, maybe it's a collective kind of responsibility of millions of people that are clinging on to a concept that they don't want to let go of, that cements its material existence in our outer reality. We carve it out of reality, basically. And obviously, it's not a process of trying to make certain ideas disappear or not, or to eliminate certain words from the language. That would be very, very difficult. But it's to gain mastery over it, because it's actually, the term evil, it's perfectly fine if you use it to manipulate your own imagination, your own hallucinations inside of you. And if you manage to, you can, because there's so many things that you can solve in your own mind's eye, in your own imagination, by bringing them into balance within you, via language as a tool. And so you don't need to interact with them or to make them battle each other or confront each other on the outside. For instance, if you manage to find peace between the ideas of communism and capitalism in your own mind by juggling with ideas, concepts, thoughts, words, language, by giving those ideas a form in your own mind and seeing how they can be put together or how they're not so much in opposition or how to transcend them, then you don't need to have the experience where you conglomerate with people that believe in capitalism and others conglomerate in around the belief of communism, and then they hash it out in our outer reality. And in other episodes, I've been talking about egregores, for instance, which are thought forms or almost like ideas becoming alive through the collective belief of humans, and then in turn manipulating humans to make sure that they continue to feed them with thoughts that give them energy. So obviously, if nobody was thinking about democracy anymore, for instance, then democracy as an idea would also not take ground in the physical world, but may also disappear wither or diminish as an organism, as a living kind of being in the immaterial dimension. And in another video, I also said that a thought cannot be dumber than the person that thought it. So when millions of people think about something, that something becomes a self-aware living entity that carries the collective intelligence of all the people that think about that concept. And it's not going to be intelligent in the sense that if it's like democracy incarnated as an entity that represents democracy and wants it to spread, wants to grow, it's going to tell you nothing about a car or about a flower. It is an intelligence that is specifically directed towards democracy as an idea and perpetuating that idea. But it's still alive nonetheless. And obviously, if less people feed it, then it becomes less and less powerful, less and less potent or big, or it carries less weight, basically. So all of that just to discuss how language is related to imagination and to reality, how it emerged, and what it's really for. So I hope you found this interesting. Don't hesitate to leave a comment, share, like, subscribe, and I'll talk to you in the next video.